He was a perfect dad in public, but I knew the truth. I used to think my dad was perfect. He was the definition of charming, the type of guy who could talk anyone into anything. At family events, he was always the life of the party, everyone's favorite person. But the moment we walked into our house, that all changed. It was like flipping a switch. The man who smiled at everyone in the world turned into an unrecognizable tyrant behind closed doors. At home, we were expected to worship him like a king. You didn't just respect him, you feared him. Our house. It felt more like a prison. We didn't have normal things like doors to our rooms, except for his and his office. Dinner. We couldn't speak unless we were spoken to first. It was like living in some bizarre dystopian world where breaking any of Dad's nonsensical rules led to one of two things: either we'd have to stand in a wall sit until our legs couldn't take it anymore, or worse, we'd be forced to make a disappointment presentation in front of the whole family. And guess what? The bar was set at 10 examples. Yeah, 10 reasons why we were a failure, one for each person in the family, including the dog if we wanted to get really thorough. When I tried to speak up about it, my mom and siblings would just shrug it off and say, "At least he doesn't hit us." But I always knew deep down, this wasn't normal. This wasn't love. And there was one rule that scared me more than anything: never ask about his work. Ever. No one knew what Dad actually did. All we knew was he worked from home, had some serious shady Eastern European business friends who looked like they'd walked out of a mafia movie, and somehow, we never lacked for anything. There were always money stacks, expensive stuff, and people in suits coming and going. But I never really paid attention to it until one day, my little sister Sooso broke that rule. Sooso was the youngest in the family. 6 years younger than me, and, honestly, the only person I didn't completely resent. While everyone else in the family followed Dad's ridiculous rules or tried to win his approval, Sooso was different. She wasn't tainted by Dad's manipulation like the rest of us. She had a pure heart, so much so, I promised I would always protect her. Little did I know, that promise would destroy everything. One day, we were all sitting around the dinner table, silence, as usual. Dad was reading the newspaper. Mom was busy with some random task. Sooso, being the sweet kid she was, just piped up, "Daddy, can I help you with work one day?" I felt the chill down my spine, but I didn't say anything. I just kept my eyes on my plate, twirling peas around with my fork. But Dad didn't take it so lightly. His voice turned cold in an instant. "You don't need to know about that," he snapped. Sooso didn't stop. "But Daddy, I never get to see you, and I'm really good at organizing stuff." She smiled at him, hopeful. The next part happened so fast, I didn't even have time to react. Dad jumped up, so quickly that his chair toppled behind him. He stormed out of the room, and I saw him return holding a black leather belt. The air in the room turned thick with fear. I acted on instinct. Before I could process what was happening, I rushed over to Sooso and shielded her with my body, taking the first hit across my back. Dad's rage intensified. He shoved me off, pulled Sooso from my arms, and locked me outside. I stood there helpless, tears streaming down my face as I watched him hit her. My siblings. Not a single one moved to stop it. They just stayed in their rooms, silent as always. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to act. I ran to my room, grabbed the nearest phone I could find, and called CPS. I was shaking as I spoke, but I knew I had to protect her. I begged them to keep my identity anonymous, to promise they wouldn't expose me as the one who'd called. The woman on the other side seemed concerned. She promised she would keep my secret. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on the door. Dad answered it with his usual charm. But within minutes, the social worker handed him my name. That's when it all fell apart. Dad played it cool, pretending to laugh it off, but I could feel the shift in the air. "Ha ha ha ha," he chuckled, his voice flat. "Kids can get so confused. The social worker laughed too, and just like that, she was on her way. No further action. No investigation. Nothing. I was crushed. Betrayed. It was like I had done the right thing, but the system failed us. I spent hours crying that night, physically and emotionally drained from the hopelessness. But it didn't end there. The betrayal from Sooso came next. I'll never forget that night. At 2 a.m., she came into my room, standing in the doorway with a blank look on her face. "You shouldn't have betrayed Daddy," she whispered before walking out. That was the breaking point for me. My little sister, the one person I thought I could trust, had turned on me. The rage and hurt I felt at that moment burned deep. It wasn't just my dad's abuse anymore, it was the family I'd been trying to protect. And now, I was alone. I thought about running. I thought about leaving that house for good. But I knew that would only make things worse. My dad had a way of making everyone feel like they were walking on eggshells, and once you stepped out of line, he'd make sure you regretted it. And Sooso, she had completely bought into it. I didn't know how to save her. But as I sat in the basement, alone with my thoughts and the broken pieces of my family, I made a vow. I was going to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Stay tuned for the next part of my story, where I fight back against everything I've been taught to fear, and uncover the secrets that could tear my family apart forever. The next few days felt like a blur. I couldn't look at Sooso without feeling that deep, gut-wrenching betrayal. It was like the walls had collapsed on me. I didn't know who I was anymore, someone who stood up for their family, or someone who had lost everything they thought was worth protecting. I didn't just lose my father that day, I lost my sister too. The one person who had kept me grounded, the only one who had a heart pure enough not to turn into a puppet of our father's twisted ways. But I couldn't stay in this emotional hole. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Dad break me, again. So, I did what I always did when things got too heavy. I worked. I fixed things. There was always something I could control, even if it was just a rusted old bike in the basement. I had no friends to hang out with, no one to lean on, and certainly no one to talk to. So, my only escape was to focus on something I could manage, my world, my decisions. I grabbed the old bike I found in the garage, and I spent days on it. Cleaning the gears, tightening the brakes, patching up the tires. It wasn't just a bike to me. It was the only thing that felt real in a world of manipulation and fear. But even the bike couldn't drown out the noise. The thrum of Dad's voice. The bitterness of my sister's betrayal. The aching emptiness in the pit of my stomach every time I saw her and realized how far she'd fallen into his clutches. And then it happened. I was walking out of the basement one afternoon when I saw Sooso standing by the front door. She didn't look up when I passed her. She just stood there, staring blankly at the floor like she was waiting for something. I almost didn't say anything to her, but the hurt in my chest was too strong. I wanted answers. I wanted to know what had changed her, how she could betray me so easily. "Sooso," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to, "what happened to us? Why did you do it?" She looked up, but the emptiness in her eyes was even worse than the betrayal itself. "Daddy told me that if I didn't tell him everything, I'd be the one who was punished. That I'd never be his little girl again." "I didn't want that," she whispered, barely audible. It was like someone had punched me in the gut. She wasn't just scared. She was brainwashed. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see reason, but I knew better. The more I fought, the more I pushed, the further I'd push her away. She wasn't the same Sooso anymore. She was his puppet. The truth hit me harder than any punishment Dad ever gave me. Sooso wasn't just my sister. She was a casualty of the system we lived in. She didn't know how to be anything but what Dad had molded her to be. She was afraid. Afraid of losing him. Afraid of losing her place in his twisted world. But there was a part of me, buried deep, that still loved her. I couldn't just walk away from her, even though she had walked away from me. I decided then that I had to be the one to protect her. I was going to fix this, no matter the cost. The next morning, I started making plans. It was time to play Dad's game, but this time, I was going to do it on my terms. I knew his rules. I had watched him manipulate and control everyone for years. Now, it was my turn. I had to outsmart him, expose the cracks in his perfect little facade. But I couldn't do it alone. I started talking to Brian, my second oldest brother, the one who always seemed like he didn't have a voice in this family. He was the most insecure, always trailing behind Dad's shadow, trying to earn his approval. I needed to know if there was any part of him that still cared about doing the right thing, or if he was too far gone. It wasn't easy getting Brian to open up. He had been living with the same fear I had, fear of Dad, fear of losing everything. But one night, when I found him sitting alone in the garage, a cigarette dangling from his lips, I saw my chance. I could have threatened to tell on him, to expose his secret, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat down beside him. "You ever think about how Dad treats us?" I asked him, watching him flick the ash from his cigarette. He didn't answer right away, but I could tell the question had landed. The silence stretched between us, but he finally spoke. "I hate it. I hate how he treats us, how he treats Mom, but what can we do? He's Dad. He's in charge. If we step out of line, we lose everything," Brian mumbled, his voice laced with fear. "Doesn't it bother you? How everything we do is controlled by him?" I asked, my voice firm now. I could see the conflict in his eyes. "It's the only way to survive," he said quietly, but I knew there was more he wasn't saying. I pushed a little harder. "Brian, you're not alone. We're all stuck in this. But what if we didn't have to be?" I asked. It was a risky move. I was walking a fine line between giving him hope and pushing him too far. He looked at me, the cigarette now hanging limply in his hand, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we don't have to keep living like this. I don't want to play his game anymore. We can stop this, Brian. We can take him down. Together." His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in them. He wasn't completely lost. Maybe there was still some fight left in him. The days that followed felt like a battle between the life I had lived for so long and the new, uncertain world I was trying to build. Every moment was tense, every interaction with Dad was like walking on eggshells, but this time I was no longer going to play by his rules. It was time to change the game, and I wasn't going to do it alone. I had Brian on my side now, and that felt like the first real step in breaking free. Our first move was to find out what was really going on with Dad's mysterious job. I knew that whatever he was doing, it had to be something shady. The man who paraded around like the picture of integrity was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. Brian's friend Logan was a huge help. Logan's dad, Ralph, was a private investigator, and when I explained the situation to him, he didn't hesitate. For a while, I thought we were running out of options, but Ralph's involvement meant we weren't doing this blindly anymore. We could finally take action. With the help of his connections, we started tracking down every lead we could. And the more we dug, the uglier it got. The problem was, Dad was good at keeping things under wraps. I started going through the house, trying to get into his office when he wasn't around, searching for anything that could tell us what was really going on. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but I had no other choice. If I wanted to protect Sooso and the rest of us, this was the path I had to follow. One day, while snooping around the office, I found something. Hidden under a stack of papers was a small envelope. Inside, there was a photo of a woman who looked a lot like our mother, but younger. She was sitting with a small child on her lap, both of them smiling warmly, something I had never seen in our family. The woman in the photo was our Aunt Grace, the one who had been erased from our family history. I couldn't believe it. For years, Dad had painted this perfect image of our family, but here was the truth. He had connections. And he had secrets. There was more to our family's story than we were ever told, and I was starting to put the pieces together. That night, I confronted Sooso again. She was sitting in her room, staring at the floor like she had been for weeks. It was almost like she was lost, but I couldn't blame her anymore. I couldn't keep harboring that anger toward her. She had been manipulated, just like all of us. I found something, I said, tossing the photo on the bed. Her eyes darted to it, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something other than fear in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? I asked her, my voice quiet, the weight of everything I had been carrying finally breaking through. Why did you do what you did? Sooso's face twisted in confusion. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to make things worse. He promised me things would be better. I sat beside her, trying to find the right words, the right way to explain everything that had been happening. Sooso, this isn't right. We need to stop him. We need to fix this. For you, for me, for all of us. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the picture in her hands. Then she looked at me, her eyes wide. What are we going to do? I don't know yet, I said, but we can't keep living like this. We need to expose him. We need to show everyone who he really is. The plan started to take shape. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it would take everything I had to pull it off, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something to fight for, something real. This wasn't about just surviving anymore. This was about taking back control. We started gathering evidence, piecing together everything we could find. The photo of Aunt Grace had been a small crack, but now I was starting to see the bigger picture. There were patterns to my dad's behavior, and the more I looked at it, the more I realized that he had been using us for years. We were pawns in his game, and I was done playing by his rules. Brian, who had always been too afraid to stand up for himself, started to come around. One night, after I had shared everything I had learned with him, he finally said something that made me believe we could actually do this. I can't keep letting him control me. I'm done, he said, his voice steady. We're going to end this. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something big. I knew that if we were going to take down my father, we would have to do it together. Our next move was crucial. I needed to gather proof of the money laundering. We knew he had connections, but now it was time to find out exactly what he was doing with them. I had no illusions, this was dangerous. If we got caught, there was no telling what would happen to us. But I had to take that risk. For Sooso. For us. I started digging through his papers, looking for anything I could find that might help. It wasn't long before I found a series of receipts, dated and stamped from several different countries. There were names on the paperwork I didn't recognize, but they all seemed to be tied to shady businesses. And then there was the bank statement. The one with the large withdrawals. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start unraveling the web of lies he had woven. I showed it to Brian, and his eyes widened. This is it, he said. We have him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We were close. So close. But we had to be careful. My dad's world was a dangerous one. Every move we made had to be calculated. And the last thing I wanted was to put Sooso in harm's way again. I had to protect her. I had to protect all of us. The tension in our house was palpable. My dad's perfect world was starting to crack, and the more I dug into his life, the more I realized how far gone things were. But it wasn't just me, everyone felt it. You could see it in the way Brian started to stand taller, the way Sooso no longer flinched every time Dad raised his voice, and even in how Mom started carrying herself differently. She wasn't the broken woman I'd grown up with. There was fire in her eyes now. Brian and I continued our quiet rebellion, finding ways to get closer to the truth without tipping Dad off. He was still too powerful, still too dangerous. He hadn't completely slipped up, but things were changing. Slowly, but surely, the mask was cracking. We just had to keep pushing. One night, when I was sneaking around the house after my dad had gone to bed, I stumbled upon something I wasn't expecting. A drawer in his office that was usually locked was wide open, and on top of a pile of old receipts sat a file folder with a name on it. It was the name of one of the men I'd seen with my dad's business associates. I didn't hesitate, I grabbed the file and took it back to my room, heart pounding. Inside, I found documents that confirmed everything I had suspected. There were contracts, business deals, fake accounts, names I didn't recognize, but one thing was clear, this was money laundering. And not just small-time stuff, this was big. There was even a list of clients, and among them was a name I knew too well. It was my dad's lawyer. A man who had helped him get away with countless things over the years. I sat on my bed, the weight of it all sinking in. This was bigger than I thought. This wasn't just about getting my sister out of harm's way anymore. This was about bringing down a network of criminals, and I was in the thick of it. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I showed Brian what I found. His face went pale as he read the documents. "We need to be careful," he whispered. "This is bigger than we thought. If we're caught." "We won't get caught," I said, determination setting in. "We're careful. We plan every move. We're not leaving until this is over." But the more we dug, the more we realized that Dad was more paranoid than we'd ever given him credit for. He started making random checks on us. He'd ask questions about our whereabouts at odd hours. He started showing up at places we hadn't been to in months, making us feel like we were being watched. It was suffocating, and I knew that if we didn't act fast, things would spiral out of control. The more I looked into Dad's connections, the more I realized how carefully he had built his empire of lies. Each business deal, each shady transaction, all the strange faces I'd seen over the years, this was the world he had built around us, a world we had never fully understood. But it was all starting to make sense now. I started focusing on one thing at a time, narrowing in on key players. The men who came and went, who smiled at our family but were really there to do business with my dad. It wasn't just about tracking their names, it was about understanding their role in all of this. These weren't just businessmen, these were men with connections to organized crime. And somehow, I had been living under the same roof with them all these years, clueless. I found old photographs, business cards, and receipts that linked Dad to underground operations. But it wasn't until I started looking into his laptop that things got truly explosive. It was tucked away in his office, and it had always been a mystery to me. Every time I tried to look at it before, he'd either been right there, or the laptop was off limits. But now, when the house was quiet, I couldn't resist. I plugged it into my own computer and started going through his files. The first thing that caught my eye was an encrypted folder, clearly marked, personal. Inside, I found images, documents with names, numbers, and addresses. A lot of the addresses led back to places I didn't recognize. But some of them were familiar, places I'd seen before, where Dad would meet clients under the cover of darkness. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I started cross-referencing the addresses, pulling up anything I could find on them. It didn't take long to figure out that these were safe houses, places Dad had used as bases to run his shady dealings. The more I found, the more I realized just how deep this ran. That night, I called Brian and Logan. We needed to move fast. With every new piece of information I uncovered, the walls around my dad's facade began to crumble. We weren't just dealing with a tyrant father anymore, we were dealing with a criminal mastermind. And I wasn't about to let him get away with it. We decided to build a case, a real, concrete one that could bring him down for good. I didn't just want to expose him as the abusive, manipulative father he was. I wanted to destroy the empire he'd built. I wanted to take away his power, his control over us, and everything he had worked for. Over the next few weeks, We dug deeper into Dad's finances, his business dealings, and his network of shady associates. We spent hours collecting evidence, going over his bank statements, analyzing the encrypted files I had uncovered. Logan helped us track down his business partners, and Brian began talking to people who had worked with Dad in the past. Slowly, the puzzle pieces started to fit together. We knew we needed more than just paper evidence. We needed to get Dad on record, actually admitting to his crimes. And that's when things started to get really dangerous. It was a Monday morning when I got a call that would change everything. Logan had tracked down one of Dad's old associates, someone who had worked with him in the early days. This man had been running operations under the radar for years, and now he was ready to talk. We arranged a meeting in a quiet coffee shop across town. I was nervous. This wasn't like the safe, controlled environment of home. This was real. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. But I knew we had to go through with it. When Logan and I walked into the cafe, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The man, who went by the name Victor, was already sitting at a corner table, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. He was nervous, but he agreed to meet with us. The conversation started slow, but soon it picked up pace. He confirmed everything we had suspected. My dad wasn't just a businessman, he was deeply involved in criminal networks, laundering money for people tied to dangerous organizations. Victor handed us a thick file, a folder full of documents, photos, and videos that could finally bring Dad down. He was willing to testify, he said. He wanted to make things right, even if it meant getting in trouble for his own actions. For the first time in years, I felt like we had a real shot at taking my dad down. After meeting with Victor, the walls around my dad's perfect life were crumbling faster than I ever imagined. With Victor's testimony and the evidence he provided, we had enough to start a real investigation. But now we had to be careful. This wasn't just about getting him to stop being abusive. We were diving into dangerous waters, and I knew that there was no turning back once we exposed him for what he really was. We started organizing everything. I spent hours working with Logan and Brian, reviewing the documents, cross-checking everything, and making sure every detail was in place. The weight of what we were about to do hit me like a ton of bricks. We were going up against someone who had been living a double life for years. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect, respectable businessman was just that, a facade. I couldn't help but think about how many people in our lives had fallen for it. Neighbors, family friends, even the people at the church. They all saw the version of Dad that was charming and polite, the one who would help anyone in need. They never saw the man who locked us in rooms, who destroyed our sense of self-worth, who made us play his twisted games. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much control he had over our lives. How, even after everything, my mom still somehow believed that the man who had terrorized us was the same man she had once fallen in love with. It wasn't just the physical abuse, it was the psychological torment. The way he manipulated us, pitted us against each other, and created an environment where none of us felt safe or loved. But now, with everything we had gathered, I knew we could finally do something about it. The next few weeks were a blur. We worked quickly, knowing that if we didn't act fast, my dad would get wind of what was happening and try to cover his tracks. But even though we had the evidence, there was still a risk. A massive one. My dad was unpredictable, and he was ruthless. I kept my guard up, always watching my back, always expecting the worst. But I couldn't stop. This was the only chance we had to make sure that none of us, especially Sooso, would ever have to live under his thumb again. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I had just gotten back from school when I noticed something strange. The house was eerily silent. My mom wasn't in the kitchen making dinner, and there was no sound of the TV or anyone moving around. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that something wasn't right. I walked through the house, checking every room. When I got to the living room, I saw it, the unmistakable black SUV in the driveway. My pulse quickened. I knew who it was. I didn't need to see his face to know that Dad was back. I grabbed my phone and texted Brian. He's here. Be ready. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. I knew that the moment my dad stepped back into our lives, everything was about to change. I texted Logan too, telling him to get the police ready, just in case things went south. But I had no idea how bad it was about to get. When I opened the door to the living room, I saw him. My dad, standing there with that same cold, calculating look on his face. The man who had tortured us for years, pretending to be the caring father, the successful businessman. For a second, I thought about everything that had led up to this moment. The betrayals, the pain, the fear we had lived with every day. But now, there was no turning back. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I wasn't going to let him control me, my siblings, or anyone else. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to take back what's mine." I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, ready for whatever came next. I wasn't alone this time. I had evidence, I had support, and I had the truth on my side. "You don't get to do that anymore," I said firmly. He sneered at me, his mask slipping just for a second. "You think you can stop me?" he spat. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? You're nothing." "I'm not nothing," I shot back. "I have everything I need to take you down. And I will. You'll never hurt us again." Before he could respond, I heard sirens outside. The sound of police cars approaching. He froze for a moment, his eyes darting to the window. He wasn't expecting this. "You're done," I said quietly, knowing that this time, it was over. The police stormed in just moments later, and my dad's expression twisted from anger to panic. They didn't need to say much. They had the evidence, they had the testimony, and they had everything they needed to put him behind bars for good. 6 months passed, and everything had changed. We moved to a new house, a fresh start away from the fear and the memories. Mom filed for divorce, and Dad's world came crashing down. He was arrested, tried, and convicted. Everything he had worked for, his empire of lies, his control over us, was gone. And in the end, it wasn't the abuse that took him down. It was his shady business dealings. We didn't just get away from him. We reclaimed our lives. I still have scars. The nightmares don't go away. But each day is a little easier. I can breathe. I can live without fear. I can take my bike out for a ride and feel the wind on my face, unburdened by the weight of the past. Sooso and I are rebuilding our relationship. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. She's not the same person she was before. Neither am I. But that's okay. We've learned how to trust each other again, one small step at a time. Brian, William, and Natalie are finding their way too. They're not the same kids they were when Dad ruled our lives. They're learning to live on their own terms, to make their own choices. And that's more than I could have ever hoped for. As for me, I still have my bad days. But I'm not afraid anymore. I know who I am, and I know that I'm strong enough to face whatever comes next. Because this time, I'm not alone. It's been a year since that day. A year since we all stood up to him. And every day, I feel a little bit more free.